It's not cheating if nothing happened, my girlfriend said. She spent 7 days planning room 412 with her ex, using my trust as her Raleigh cover story. I didn't yell or argue. At 11:47 p.m., I left her "he trusts me" text on the counter and replaced her keys with a 30-day notice. Because this story doesn't make sense without it. I'm 31. I work in project coordination logistics, mostly remote now. I'm not someone who makes scenes. When something's wrong, my default is to go quiet and think rather than react immediately. Sarah would probably describe that as shutting down. I'd describe it as trying not to say something I'll regret. Sarah and I had been together for 4 years when this happened. We'd lived together for 2 of those. Her name was on the utilities. Mine was on the lease. In 4 years, I never went through her phone. I want to be clear about that because it matters to everything that follows. Not because I was naive, I just didn't have a reason to. She'd never given me one. I trusted her the way you trust someone after 4 years of small, ordinary things accumulating into something you've genuinely built together. Not a perfect thing, but a real one. She's 30, works in marketing at a mid-size agency. Good at her job, good with people. She had a wide social circle, a lot of college friends I'd met over the years and genuinely liked. She mentioned her ex Daniel exactly once in a way that actually registered. We were having dinner about 2 months before all of this, and she said, "Oh, I ran into Daniel last week." Just like that. The way you'd mention someone you passed in a grocery store aisle. I asked how he was. She said, "Fine, I think it was quick." I nodded, and we moved on. I keep coming back to that word, quick. The way it was already in the sentence before she said it. Prepositioned. I didn't catch it at the time. It's the kind of detail that only becomes visible in reverse. The 5 or 6 weeks before this happened, she was slightly off. Distracted in the evenings, on her phone more than usual. Less present in the way that's hard to name but easy to feel. She'd mentioned a difficult campaign at work. I gave her room. I assumed she'd resurface when the project wrapped. She mentioned Daniel again a few weeks after that dinner. Ran into him at the coffee shop. It was nothing. I nodded and filed it. I was apparently very good at filing things. I think I was trusting her. I'm just not sure anymore that trust and deliberately not looking are as different as I used to believe. It was a Tuesday evening. I was making coffee. Sarah was in the shower. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, the same place she always puts it when she gets home. I wasn't near it. I wasn't looking at it. I was at the coffee maker, maybe 4 feet away, when the screen lit up. I saw the preview from where I was standing. I wasn't holding the phone. I wasn't searching for anything. The notification appeared the way they do, and the words were right there in the preview window before the screen went dark again. Daniel. Harbor Suites room, 412 confirmed, let me know your arrival window. I stood there for a moment. Just stood there. Then I walked over and picked it up. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were planning something for a group. Maybe Daniel had texted the wrong contact. Maybe I was missing some piece of context that would make the words mean something different from what they looked like. I told myself all of this in the few seconds it took me to open the thread. Then I read it. Not quickly. Carefully, the way you read something when you're hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something else if you just go slowly enough. They didn't. I was still standing at the counter when I heard Sarah come down the hall from the bathroom. She came into the kitchen, looked at me, then at the phone in my hand, then at my face. She didn't say what's wrong. She didn't say what are you looking at. She went straight to it. Whatever you saw, nothing happened. Not what did you see. Not let me explain. Just the defense, pre-assembled, like she'd been carrying it in her pocket waiting for exactly this moment. I held up the screen so she could see it. She looked at it without flinching. Then, quieter, like repetition was the same as explanation. Nothing happened. I asked, "Did you plan to go?" The pause that followed was longer than it needed to be. She looked at the counter, then at me. "That's not fair," she said. "You're taking something out of context." I asked what context covered a confirmed hotel reservation and a week of messages between her and her ex. "You went through my phone. It lit up on the counter. I was at the coffee maker. The preview was visible from where I was standing. You opened it. After I saw Harbor Suites and a room number in the preview." "Yes." She turned slightly toward the window. "You're turning this into something it wasn't." That was when I started thinking backwards. The dinner where she'd mentioned Daniel, the practiced casualness of it, the word quick placed too neatly into the sentence, like she'd already decided on the phrasing before she spoke. The distracted weeks after that. The phone held at a slightly different angle in the evenings. A night she said it had died when I'd called. The second mention, a few weeks later, ran into him at the coffee shop. It was nothing. The word, nothing doing, quiet, consistent work across multiple conversations, and me accepting it each time without question. None of it had been proof. None of it had even risen to the level of a flag I'd consciously raised. But standing in the kitchen with her phone in my hand and her back half turned to me, it had a shape now. The separate moments I'd filed under nothing together, they were too consistent to be coincidence. Each one had needed a small lie to function smoothly. I just hadn't been the person who needed to notice. I need you to stop handling my things, she said. Not I can explain. That. It told me exactly where her head was. Not on the conversation we were having, not on 4 years. On managing the terms, who was going to look unreasonable, who was going to be the problem in the story she was already composing. One more time, I said. Did you plan to go? She didn't answer that. She said, can you just calm down? I wasn't loud. I was, if anything, extremely quiet. But I understood. We weren't going to have an honest conversation. She wasn't going to name what I was holding, and I had no intention of starting a semantic debate about what nothing was supposed to cover. I didn't sleep much that night. Sarah went quiet, not apologetic quiet, the kind that's really just waiting. Strategic quiet. Before I'd figured out what I was going to do or who I was going to say anything to, my phone went off the next morning. Marcus, hey, Sarah reached out, said things are rough between you two. You doing okay? Then Priya, about an hour later. Hey, Sarah texted me. Just checking in. Then, a missed call from my sister. My sister, who I hadn't told a single thing to. Who would have had no way of knowing any of this unless Sarah had called her. I sat with that for a few minutes. What Sarah had built overnight was clean and specific. I'd found something on her phone, misread it, refused to let her explain, and gone silent. I was the one who couldn't communicate. She was the one reaching out, trying. She'd gotten to 3 people, my 2 best friends and my sister, before I'd even decided what I was going to do, and she'd handed each of them a version of events in which she was the reasonable party and I was the one making things impossible. She hadn't mentioned the hotel, hadn't mentioned room 412 or the week of messages or the cover story. Just, he found something, overreacted, went cold. A clean story. Simple, easy to believe about someone who goes quiet when he's hurt. And I realized then that the false narrative wasn't improvised. She'd been thinking ahead for longer than I knew. The practiced way she'd mentioned Daniel at dinner. The Raleigh cover story filed with Maya weeks before the planned date. She didn't build those structures because she expected to get caught. She built them because she was someone who kept her exits well organized. The double down wasn't just happening in my kitchen. It was happening across my contact list, before I'd said a word to anyone. I didn't call anyone back. I opened the message thread and read it from the beginning. 7 days. The thread went back 7 days. I read all of it. It started with Daniel suggesting a date. What about the 14th? I can get away that weekend. Sarah. The 14th works. Let me sort the logistics on my end. That phrase, sort the logistics, I kept coming back to it. That's not how you talk about something impulsive. That's project language. That's how you talk about something you've already decided. They discussed location. Daniel mentioned Miami. Sarah said something closer made more sense. Harbor Suites is 20 minutes from me, and the rooms are nicer than they look online. She'd already researched it. She knew the hotel before he suggested it. I'll book us into something with a balcony if there's availability. Room 412 confirmed 2 days later. After that, the messages were about timing arrival windows, how long they'd realistically have. At one point, Daniel wrote, "How much time do we have?" She wrote back, "Enough. Let's not make plans to leave the room." I read that one twice. 6 days before the planned date, she sorted the cover story. "I'm going to tell him I'm visiting Maya in Raleigh for the weekend." Daniel, "Will he check?" Sarah, "He won't. He trusts me. He won't. He trusts me." I was standing at the same counter, same spot as the night before, and I read those 4 words and felt something go quiet in my chest. Not the way grief goes quiet, and not the way anger does. The way certainty does. The noise in my head since the previous evening settled into something flat and clear. I want to be honest about what the messages proved and what they didn't. They proved she had planned to go. They proved she'd arranged a lie that specifically named me as the person who would be deceived, not as an afterthought, but as a practical detail sorted 6 days in advance. They proved she'd confirmed a room, discussed a time window, and calculated that my trust in her was something she could work around. They didn't prove what happened in room 412. She said she didn't go. I had no way to verify that. But here's where I landed. If you spend 7 days planning, confirm a specific room, and arrange a lie that positions your partner as the person who won't notice the thing that happened is the planning. The thing that happened is the decision, made fresh each morning for an entire week. She had gone somewhere mentally, logistically, deliberately every day during that stretch, and come home each evening and sat across from me and said nothing. That was what I couldn't give her nothing happened to cover. The intent was the betrayal, not the act. I put the phone down. I sat with it for an hour. Then, I got a piece of paper. I'm not going to pretend I wrote the note with cold clarity. I was hurt. I want to say that plainly. But I was done with the semantic debate. Done trying to find the phrasing that would make her engage honestly with what I was holding. That conversation had one move left in it. She'd say nothing happened again. And I'd have to decide whether I was willing to let that be the end of it. I wasn't. I wrote. I know what was planned. I don't need a semantic debate about what nothing means. I'm leaving. The lease is in my name. I'll give you 30 days to make your arrangements. No inventory of grievances. No list of receipts. No emotional accounting going back to the dinner where she first said it was quick. Just what I knew and what I'd decided. I took a photo of the note before I set it on the table. Not for any strategic reason. I wasn't thinking about using it. I just needed to mark the moment. To make it fixed. To turn it into something that couldn't be softened or quietly revised later. The timestamp read Tuesday, 11:47 p.m. Irrevocable. That word kept surfacing in my head. Whatever came next, Tuesday at 11:47 p.m. was a fact. It couldn't be renegotiated or walked back or covered by what hadn't happened in a hotel room. I packed with what I can only describe as surgical precision. My clothes, my laptop, my books, careful to take only what was clearly mine. One framed photo of my family from the shelf in the bedroom. Nothing that required a conversation about ownership. Nothing that gave her a reason to call. The spare key went on the counter next to the note. The door closed. I was gone before she got home. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like someone who had made the only call that was available to him and was now going to have to live with what came after. 6 months. That's how long it was, between the Tuesday I left and the Friday I walked into the Oak Barrel for Marcus's birthday. It wasn't my first time out since the breakup. I'd had dinners, seen people, but it was the first time I'd been somewhere that felt like genuinely shared territory, a place where the old circle overlapped and where she might reasonably show up. I hadn't been avoiding it out of fear. I just hadn't been in a hurry to sit somewhere her name might come up, where someone might look at me with that particular kind of careful sympathy that meant she'd gotten there first. I arrived around 8. Marcus spotted me at the door and came over. We did the thing where you're both aware something significant has happened and you silently agree to lead with normal things first. We got drinks. I talked to Priya for a bit. Said hello to a few other people I knew from before. It was a fine night. I was genuinely okay. Maybe 20 minutes in, I looked across the room and saw Sarah. She was near the booths on the far side, talking to someone I didn't recognize. She saw me at about the same moment. I held her gaze for a second, then turned back to whatever Marcus was saying. I didn't leave. I didn't recalculate. I just continued the evening. About 20 minutes later, she came over. "Hey," she said. "Hey." A beat. Then, "We should probably talk." "About what?" "You never really let me explain." "Properly." "You explained," I said. "You said nothing happened." "I mean actually explain. In person. Like adults." "Sarah." "What?" I read the messages. All of them. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, something had shifted, less controlled, more exposed. "So you just decided, and that was it? No conversation?" "Yeah. Just like that. 4 years, and you just decided." 4 years, I said. And a week of planning. And room 412. And a cover story about Maya and a weekend in Raleigh. I kept my voice flat. "Yeah." She looked at me. Something moved through her face, not guilt exactly, more like the specific recognition that the version of events she'd been operating with wasn't the one I had. "I didn't go," she said. "I need you to understand that. I didn't go. I know you've said that. It has to mean something to you." "It means you didn't go," I said. "I'm glad you didn't." "So then why?" "Because you planned to. Because you arranged a lie that specifically accounted for me, that I'd think you were in Raleigh, that I wouldn't ask questions. Because you looked at me every day that week and kept building it anyway. I paused for a second. That's what happened. Even if nothing else did. She was quiet. I watched her reach for the next angle, the next phrasing that would reopen the negotiation. There wasn't one left. The sentence she kept circling back to was nothing happened, and she knew what I was going to do with it. So that's it, she said. You told me nothing happened, I said. I believed you. I turned back to Marcus. He hadn't been trying to listen, but we were close enough that the last stretch of the exchange had been audible. He didn't say anything. He looked at his pint for a moment, then picked it up, took a sip, and said something about the beer on tap, and we went back to talking. Sarah stood there for another moment. Then she left back toward the booth side. She was out of the bar about 40 minutes later. I saw her go. She said goodbye to the person she'd been talking to, pulled on her jacket, and walked out without coming back to where we were. I stayed until close to 11. Said proper goodbyes to Marcus, to Priya, to the others. Walked out into a cool, ordinary Friday night and drove home. Nothing felt like a victory. It felt like a door that had been slightly opened for 6 months quietly closing. No ceremony, no dramatic moment. Just shut. Marcus texted the next morning. You good? I texted back. Yeah. I'm good. I should say something about the voicemails, because they're part of the picture. She left 8 of them in the 3 days after I walked out. I didn't listen until about a week later. I needed enough distance to hear them without it pulling me back into something I'd already closed. The first one was short and sharp. You left a note. You're seriously doing this right now. Call me back. The next few tracked the same line she'd taken with Marcus and Priya and my sister. I'd overreacted, refused to have a real conversation, left like a coward instead of talking like an adult. She was still managing the story, still trying to get her version established as the one that made sense. Messages 5 and 6 were quieter. The edge had gone out of her voice, replaced by something that sounded like the beginning of a different kind of fear. Then 7 and 8. I didn't go. I need you to hear me say that. I didn't go. I know what you have. I know what it looks like. But I didn't go, and I need that to matter to you. Please. I sat with those 2 for a while. I want to be honest. It did matter. I'm not made of stone. The fact that she hadn't gone meant something the way a near miss means something, the way it matters that the worst thing didn't happen. I don't want to pretend otherwise. But what I kept coming back to was this. She had built the cover story. She had booked the room. She had looked at me across 7 days and chosen, every morning, to keep going. And then, for whatever reason, second thoughts, circumstance, I don't know, she didn't go. And her position was that the ending was the only part that should count. I couldn't give her that. It wasn't mine to give. I deleted all 8 voicemails. I didn't call back. The mutual friends sorted themselves out over the following weeks. A couple of them had texted me, with the careful, vague check-ins that meant they'd heard her version first. I didn't correct it. I didn't explain. I just kept being somewhere else, and over time the narrative that I'd blown up over just text got quieter on its own. People pieced things together without my help. I'm in a smaller apartment now. My name only on the lease. It's quieter than what I had before, less in some ways, and in others more mine than anything has felt in a long time. I'm not going to tell you I've moved on. That phrase doesn't mean much to me. What I'll say is, I made the right call. I know it the way you know heavy, permanent things, not with relief, but with a kind of settled certainty that doesn't need to be argued. That's enough.